The first thing I really wanted to do was return the favor. Tony's compliment was very generous, but certainly no building that we've ever done or architecture that we've ever put together that is of some significance and some beauty doesn't happen without a really good client. And I think that our projects are always better for a very involved client, even though, as I sit here and listen to Tony, I can recall all the meetings we went through when he said, let's just take one more look at it. And we knew that the foundation was getting poured as we spoke. It's great to hear him talk about it and describe it. I always wonder whether we're going to get back to that anatomical metaphor, which is the sort of source of the project, and he always comes out with it, inevitably. But there is, it all started with that image of the Brooklyn Bridge when we were sort of put up against a number of other firms to compete for the job, and Tony said the thing that we imagined for this, and I'm not going to tell you where the site is the Brooklyn Bridge, and I want you to come up with some ideas that show me you understand that concept. So we did. We got the job, and as you can see from the picture, it's the Brooklyn Bridge, very clearly. We all knew he wasn't literal or intended to be literal about it. We all knew it was a metaphor. And the idea was to be powerful, obviously, to be to have a very strong masonry presence, to be about old New York. And I'd like to explain how, and simultaneously to be thoroughly contemporary. I think that Tony, the last part of what Tony's vision is that he did not want a retread of anything that happened in the past. He was looking for that melding of across time periods, and that's hopefully what we achieved. So I'll try to explain a little bit how we try to put all that together in this particular building. In order to understand the architecture, there are a couple of things that are important to it. The client is very important, and the client is Tony, who functioned as a developer, as owner. There were also 6 other individuals who intended to live here. And together they bought the project and asked Tony to guide them through the process and to create the vision for the project. So Tony was owner-developer, he was shepherd, he was wrangler, he was a number of other roles as well in the process. But it had a great bearing on the architecture because there are a lot of things that happened here that don't happen in normal apartment buildings. In many ways, this is as much a home for an individual as it is a building for a sort of nameless group of people who buy into it. If I can turn to the next slide. So Tony described very well, I thought, the street itself, and we talked a bit about it. It's a wonderful old Belgian block, and it's quiet, kind of backwater street. It dead ends into Broadway. It does not go on for too long, and it has these wonderful alleyway remnants that are definitely from a time gone past. If you are building there, is obviously the lightly shaded building, and in back is Shinbone Alley that continues to the east on the next block. And just to name is sort of a wonderful Damon Runyon-esque type of appellation. So our building is right there, and it was as important as anything to sort of keep that that character in mind. If we can have the next shot. There are 2 traditions of building stock in the area, I think, and one is the cast iron buildings you saw earlier, and they're on the lower right-hand slide. Though the examples of cast iron architecture, I think they're 1 to 5 Bond Street, are truly magnificent, beautiful, beautiful buildings, and they have a remarkable quality to them. Also very prominent in the area, and our 2 neighbors are the masonry buildings to the right and left there, and the very famous Louis Sullivan building around the corner. So a very strong, heavy, deep masonry tradition as well in the area. And what we wanted to do was, in part, was weave those 2 traditions together and try to explain how we went about that. So if we can have the next slide. Next, I'm saying slide. Just a quick run through of the plans. This is the ground floor plan. And really all I want to say about this, Bond Street is to the top. Number one, there is the entrance. This was meant to, very much as I said before, to function as a home. So the front of this particular building is the front hallway, in a very real sense for the few inhabitants of the building. And the back is their garden, and the area off of it functions as sort of playroom and gym. Next slide. The basic plans, they're very large units, very substantial units. They have a front and back orientation, bedrooms in the back, living area in the front. Next slide. There are full floor units that take up the whole floor. In each case, affecting the architecture very prominently is the fact that there are living rooms across the whole front. So contrary to a lot of other kinds of apartment buildings, multifamily buildings, we had one use across the whole front. Next slide.
Roughly 8,000 square foot floors.
Yeah. So the facade, which is that prominent element of this building that faces onto the street that we're all here to discuss. The facade was conceived, as I said, of those two strains of the masonry and the cast iron, and it is a screen of stone, two types of stone, that face onto the street and are separated from bronze floor-to-ceiling sliding doors in back of them. So a continuous glass and bronze facade with a screen of obviously irregularly placed stone pieces in front. The two layers of stone are in front a slightly creamier and lighter tone, and in the back, in these smaller pieces, the darker stone.
A sense of unpredictability was essential to the exterior design as well, even though that you could see that there are four basic lines or divisions, but there had to be a sense of randomness to it, so that a studied randomness to it, so that the building would remain interesting and exciting over time.
Right. So part of obviously the design of any facade comes from the inside out and from the outside in. And as I mentioned, the unit plans that you saw earlier, as you go up and down this building, there's a very, very, very variegated unit mix. The first two floors above the ground floor are units side by side. The next two floors are floor-throughs. There's a triplex worked in there, 3/4 size, and a duplex. So in a way, the facade organization it didn't start off with a very symmetrical layout. And the kind of organization of the screen evolved naturally from that variety that we could take advantage of. Simultaneously, the rooms in behind were consistent in their use as living rooms. And so the continuous plane of bronze and glass was something that was easily dealt with. There's a density that we played a lot with across this facade from side to side, making it a little bit less dense in the middle and a little bit more dense to the sides. And there were very many variegations of that that we went through. Let's go to the next one. Some of those are on the right. We studied very hard the cast iron building because we were most interested in achieving the openness, the frame-like quality, the character of that building, not in terms of its materials so much, but in terms of the sort of laciness of it. And so we studied it very carefully and understood and tried to make an equivalency between our building's openness, the degree of openness of the screen, and that cast iron building. We can go to the next one. 70%, yeah. We literally have a room full of these diagrams. And we went through every single one of them. This is an example of the kind of studies we do. It's always interesting to me, just because at one point in discussing degree of density, we understood that when we did a positive negative, it came out feeling very different. I think the one on the right, which shows the glass areas, looks much more open than the one on the left. Next one. So we designed as much, as I say, from the inside out and from the outside in. The example of the cast iron building was taking the context and bringing it into the building, taking a look at those cast iron buildings, understanding what they meant in terms of their degree of openness and transposing that into our language. And then to come back to the notion that Tony already opened and began discussing, was a real sense of craft. We wanted our building, I think, in the grand tradition of some of the wonderful buildings in New York, to have a real sense of craft. How do you do that when you're trying to be a more contemporary, more simple? And I think it is, in this particular case, it's in the stonework, in the quality of the finish, which is a very prominently hammer finished, actually by hand, right? The way, yeah, it repeats. The way the stones are laid one against the other, so that in fact they are in a kind of pinwheel orientation. You see the edges of the stone, and it changes from one to the next as they go up the columns. And the cast iron itself, or I'm sorry, the equivalent of the sort of cast iron in terms of the metaphor, the bronze and glass, which is hand-rubbed bronze in behind the stone. We can go to the next one.
What kind of stone?
Tony indicated it was a Jerusalem gold. And what's the second one? Sorry, or Toscano. Is that right, Tom?
Two different ones.
But one of the last thing I really want to talk a little bit about in terms of how this facade evolved was that because we were working for the owners, it was as important as anything to have these materials on display for the individual unit. When you look out, you look at the backside of your facade. When you look out of an old cast iron building, you sense some of that ornamentation. You look out your window, you sense the columns and the wonderful detail that surrounds you. In this particular facade, you sense the stonework. You come up close, the building still resonates at a very close-in scale, and that was very important for us in terms of the quality of the bronze, the quality of the stonework. Just pulling apart the sort of elements, if you can think of a sort of architectural school layering diagram, pulling apart the architectural elements meant that you also got a kind of diagonal view that added to that degree and that level of openness, which is something that we treasured and really tried to work hard at understanding as well. I'm ready to wrap it up. Go to the next one. So back to some shots of the exterior. On the next one. So on the back side, the kind of Tony realized very early on, as did we all, that on the Bleecker Street side there is a wonderful continuation of Shinbone Alley that basically is on axis practically with the center of our rear facade. So it was as important as anything to have something back in there that spoke about the character of the building. So if you imagine the wrapper coming off and sort of going overarching the building and landing on the backside, you see the regularity of the bronze duplicated, and then set against it is the centerpiece, which you can't quite see as well as in this photograph, but it has that same irregular patterning. Go to the next one. So here we are at the base, and you can get a nice feel of the building as it hits the ground, the canopy. And the gentleman working there underneath the canopy is Ken Hiratsuka. And if we can get the next shot, Tony spoke about, I think, a really marvelous contribution to the public realm. Sidewalk art, the traditional, old, very thick, monolithic granite slabs that tend to be a little slippery sometimes and are often chiseled a little bit so that they people can walk on immediately. Tony had the wonderful notion of making that into sculpture, and that is Ken Hiratsuka working on a continuous line that took him, what, a month to do? Almost 3 months. We still haven't measured the line yet.
It's about 7/8 of a mile.
Okay, you have measured it.
And you're looking at in this shot that this was the most challenging approval of the project. Many projects, especially those in historic districts, have begin with a challenging approval. This one was not an historic district at the time and is now part of the soon-to-be NoHo historic district extension. But the distinctive sidewalks have not been well thought of by the Department of Transportation for a number of years, and so this one, the offer to bring back 18 slabs of 16-foot long granite on the sidewalk was a hard one to turn down, but it still required a careful hand-holding into the approval stage. But it is really, like the building, it's kind of a masonry tradition recaptured in a modern way.